Stephen Bedard here, and one of my great passions right now is trying to help congregations become more welcoming and inclusive of people with disabilities. Now, if you're a practical kind of guy like me, your first question is going to be, how much is this going to cost? What's the price tag for doing something like this? Well, when I'm talking about becoming welcoming and inclusive, I'm not talking about physical renovations to the building. I'm not talking about putting in an elevator and ramps and that type of thing. I'm assuming that that kind of thing has already been done in your church. If you haven't had those renovations, if your building is not accessible yet, you really need to get on that. But I'm not talking so much about physical accessibility. I'm not talking about just getting a person with a disability into your building. How do you become welcoming and inclusive, and what does that cost? So the simple answer to that is nothing and a lot. It's both. So when I say nothing, I mean it doesn't have to cost you the amount to hire a new staff person. You don't have to have an associate pastor of disability ministry, although if you can do that, that's a wonderful thing to have. It doesn't have to cost you a new curriculum. It doesn't have to cost you the renovation of a room, like a room that would help people with sensory overload, although those things are good. And if you can do that, I would encourage you to do that. But you don't have to do those things. Really, what is needed for inclusion and welcoming is just to be present. It's to have communication with the person, the individual with the disability, with their family, not assuming that you know what they need or what they want, but just taking the time to talk to them and listen to their story. Hear what it is that they need, what it is that they want. Maybe it's just listening to them vent about bad experiences in the past. Whatever it might be, just allow that communication to be key. It's also about relationships. It's being present in their life, being a friend, being someone who cares about what is going on in their life. And there's no price tag there. That's not something that you're going to have to put a line item in your budget and say, okay, we're going to budget this much money for friendships. It doesn't work that way. Either you do it or you don't do it. So in one way, it doesn't cost you anything to be welcoming and inclusive. But in another way, it costs a lot. Not financially, but it costs in that it might make church and ministry a bit more messy. That you might not know what's going to happen on a Sunday morning. I remember being a guest preacher at a church. Never had been to this church before in my life. I get up to start preaching and I hear this loud sound. Sounded like someone screaming in pain, but I noticed that no one else was making any reaction. No one was looking concerned. So I assumed that this was a normal thing that happened on a Sunday morning, and that's indeed what it was. And I eventually met the young man after the service and was able to see him. But that congregation accepted that. They didn't see that as being a disruption in the kind of service that they wanted. It was just a part of church that he would include his sounds. And as a pastor for different churches, I've had those kind of things as well, where people make those sounds. And my children do that as well. And it's okay. And so that does cost something, in that you may have an expectation of what church looks like, where you have control over every little thing that's going to happen, that you know how things are going to go, what things are going to sound like, what things are going to look like. And if you become fully welcoming and inclusive towards people with disabilities, you might not know. You might not know what's going to be said. My son once, in the middle of a service, and this is when I wasn't preaching, so we were just attending this church, my son just out of the blue said, "Just kill me now." And it was okay. He has autism. He was scripting from a movie, and that's what he wanted to say in that church service, and it was okay. But you have to wrestle with that. You have to decide, is that really what you want? Are you willing to have things messy? Are you willing to have relationships and worship services and ministries that revolve around some very significant needs? There is a cost to that. You might find that things are just not the way you once expected, but it might be better. It might actually be better. So what does it cost to be a welcoming and inclusive church for people with disabilities? Nothing and a lot. Don't look for a financial cost for it. Look to a relationship cost. Look to an expectation cost. And please consider becoming that welcoming and inclusive church. I would encourage you to check out my website, disabilityandchurch.com, where I try to provide resources to help churches become welcoming and inclusive. Thank you, and God bless.